We have to understand that what we do in the weight room is supposed to supplement what we do in the field, right?
He's gonna do 2 sets of 2 exercises, and then he's gonna go pitch that day. It's gonna be enough stimulus to kind of capture whatever training we're looking for, but not so much where it's gonna impact performance.
4, 6, 8 weeks later, you're just kind of like cooked, and Velo's down or you're on the shelf.
What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Around the Mound here at Trail Athletics. I'm joined today by Ethan Dyer and Matthew Jordan, two masterminds when it comes to the field. Myself, John Lantigua. Today we're gonna talk about in-season lifting, kind of a hot topic during this time of the year, always. I have a question for you guys to start off. What is one of the biggest mistakes that guys make in regards to in-season lifting?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's gonna be volume. We don't manage volume very well. Guys typically will lift too much, and we just get into situations where athletes are typically, they'll overdo it one week, be so sore from the combined load of game and lifting that they do nothing the next week, and then we just get this series of ups and downs that are really detrimental to maintaining progress throughout the course of a season.
Yeah, I think, kids have good intentions, especially high school, younger college guys want to get in the gym, and they know that being bigger and stronger and faster are valuable qualities. And it's really easy to overdo it, unfortunately, especially two-way guys in high school, even some two-way guys in college ball as well. You're playing every day, or 4 or 5 days a week sometimes, and you end up lifting 4 or 5 days a week, and then you're buried, and it's not ideal. Guys get beat up.
Yeah, it's understanding too going from the off season where you have the time and you're not playing games, so practice is important, but you don't have the pressure of performing in the game, because we have to understand that the most important thing is performing in the game. So when you go from the off season where you're training 4 or 5 times a week, and it's okay to be sore, but once you hit the season and you continue the same volume, just piling 9 in of games on a daily basis, plus the lifting, plus more conditioning that you're doing with schools and stuff, it's just too much work, and the increase of workload is just too high. And then you're sore, you're fatigued, like Jordan said, and then you don't perform in the game, you're tired, you have to take a week off, and then you're just in this constant wave that it's inefficient. So with that being said, what will be the best thing to do in regards to how much should we lift? Let's say for a college or a pro guy, pitcher specifically.
Typically, I'm gonna go twice a week for guys. College and pro, traditionally it's twice a week. We're gonna have one heavier day when you're fresh and post your biggest throwing session if possible. We're gonna do something a little bit more movement-based, a little bit geared towards promoting recovery, but still maintaining some of those athletic qualities that we talked about.
I think for people who maybe don't know, could you elaborate a little bit on using more movement-based stuff, a movement day type of thing, in terms of promoting recovery as opposed to trying to drive output or power or anything like that, especially in season?
Yeah, absolutely. So really, we have our program separated into like movement prep and pure lift. So when I'm talking about a movement day, I'm utilizing more movement prep style movements. So I'm not asking a guy to do an hour's worth of work, pre-game every single day, and I can build some of that stuff into the training program. So, maybe fuller, quote, deeper range of motions on a movement day where I can still capture good range of motion without really asking a guy to handle a ton of load, that sort of thing. Being conscious of like unilateral versus bilateral exercises and the effects that they're gonna have on the body as a whole. Just being a little bit more diverse with my movement selection in general, a little bit more multi-planner, that kind of thing.
Another piece of that guys, again, not to dunk on the younger guys, but that they don't really consider is like how much time they're spending in the gym on a given day. So like you said, like maybe you just got to the gym from the ball field, or you have a game tomorrow and it's your day off and this is your opportunity, Monday sometimes for pro guys, and they want to almost like make up for somehow the time that they've been spending on the field in the last couple of weeks. And then you end up sort of inadvertently setting yourself back for the coming game volume that you're going to have to deal with. Whereas, along similar lines as to what Maddie's talking about with sort of like movement days and kind of more of like a get in, get out type of thing. I think it's something that we should probably touch on, that I think is a foundational thing for lifting, not even necessarily in season, but like in general for high school athletes, some younger college athletes, even some pro guys, is not understanding the difference between like bodybuilding and training for sport. It's like, okay, I have my day off. I'm gonna go like hit 5 sets of squats, 6 sets of squats, and then some knee extensions and hamstring curls. And then you are sore for, 36, 72 hours, whatever. And again, you're just kind of like, you have these little windows of time to bounce back, and instead you take another step back. And then 4, 6, 8 weeks later, you're just kind of like cooked, and Velo's down, or you're on the shelf, or whatever.
I want to go over a couple of things you guys both mentioned. One, what Jordan mentioned, you're placing one heavy day, one that's kind of strength day, another one more movement based, and just going with what you said about making sure that you're not going too bodybuilding style. We have to understand that what we do in the weight room is supposed to supplement what we do in the field, right? Can we do stuff in the weight room that helps us out? So when we place those things, it's super important. So if we're going super heavy on the day before or our day off, and you're pitching tomorrow, then like you said, you're gonna set yourself back. So can we find ways where, hey, if you pitch today, or let's say you're a starter in a 6-day rotation, can we get a lift in as quickly as possible to give you enough rest time, especially that heavy strength one that's you need the most soul for get that out of the way as quickly as possible, and then get something more tissue restoration wise, rebuild your tissues with more isometrics, low level eccentrics to help the body recover from everything that we've done to prepare you for the next outing. I think it's when things are placed is very important. And we could go in, if you have a guy, especially in high school or college, on a 7-day rotation that's throwing once a week. We know they're going to throw either Friday night guy, or Saturday. How will you structure that week for your guys?
And that's a kind of a good segue, because it's like talking about not pushing it too hard. We don't want to, I'm not telling my guys like, hey, don't ever get after it in the gym in season, right? Like it just has to make sense. And if you are, most high school guys, especially if you're a PO, you're looking at, something like a 7-day rotation. College guys, something similar depending on the role and the context. You can get after it, just, try to maybe front load it. And by front loading, I mean like, let's say you start on a Sunday, and it's a 11 a.m. game. You got all day, man. Like you can get in the gym. You don't have to, like, rest and recovery is a big deal, but that doesn't mean you have to shut it down at 2 p.m. on a Sunday, right? And there are certainly outlier situations where, hey, I was throwing a no-hitter. I was excited. My coach was excited. I threw 132 pitches or whatever, which that's a conversation for another day probably. But yeah, like you can absolutely get in the gym and hit a handful of relatively high intensity sets, right? Whatever it might be. And then obviously also keeping in mind, when are you throwing your pen, right? Like anybody who's on a 5-6 day rotation, you're going to be throwing a bullpen at some point, unless you're like barely hanging on health wise and you're just saving your bullets for game day, which if you got that far, maybe you need to talk to me, Matt, and John about off-season lifting maybe. But yeah, and then that kind of leads into, another piece of that, which is like your second smaller window to touch something a little bit more serious or aggressive is probably going to be post-pen, depending on if you are, if I'm like the Sunday guy and I have I'm like a Friday pen guy, then maybe feel it out and think about things that you did in the off season that didn't necessarily like put you in the hospital for 2 days. But yeah, I mean, there are definitely windows. We're just trying to say, like, you have to be smart. Like, it's not going to be like a day before start, nerves turns into you going and like lifting for 3 hours the day before start, and then you're 82 to 84 and, a couple balls go over the wall.
Well said. I agree completely. As far as like the actual layout of the week, something you kind of alluded to, strength, post bullpen, typically low rep, low set, pretty high intent. Like Ethan said, post bullpen is a really good opportunity to get in some like really high effort, power plyometric reps. Some jumping stuff pre-start, like the night before even, is a really fantastic way to do it. A lot of college and pro guys are doing like neuro days essentially the day before start. So I think that's a really great way to check that box on a weekly basis if you're a starter. And then, one thing me and you have talked about before is like, hey, what if I have a guy that really needs to continue to either manage his body weight or even add body weight? Like, how do we mitigate body weight loss during the season? And one thing that, is a little bit more controversial that I've had success with in the past is same day lifts post start. Obviously, if you're like a college or a pro guy, this is probably going to be a first half of the season thing. Like Ethan said, if you throw 100 pitches, you should not be lifting after the game. Or if it's just like a crazy high intent day, a lot of work, like that's probably not the best idea. But if you know you're a starter or maybe you're a pro guy that's piggybacking, you're going to throw 40 pitches on Friday, and one of your huge goals within the organization is to continue to put on lean body mass, you can go in and get like a more traditional hypertrophy set in and start recovery that next day rather than going high intent day on the mound and as soon as you get in the next day, another high intent lift and just kind of doubling up on that high intent. We're just trying to mitigate how many high days we have. It's kind of the theme that's emerging already, something I've talked about a lot in the past. If we're doing a good job with in-season lifting, we're kind of eliminating the medium days. Most guys just accumulate a ton of medium intent work over the course of a long season, and it just adds up. Be high intent with a purpose, whether that means, heavy weight or, high intent as far as like speed and power. And then when it's not a high intent day, get quality movements in, chill out. Yeah, chill out is the perfect way to say it.
Yeah, actually catch your breath.
The medium is where guys go to die, I think.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's being smart is kind of the biggest thing. Understanding, like you said, if you go 105 pitches, all right, you should not be doing anything. But if you get rocked in 2 innings, maybe go in there and get something done, get something productive done, so you could recover and be more ready for your next outing. And sometimes getting a workout in is not going in the gym for 50, 60 minutes. Like you could go in and do a heavy set of deadlifts or squats, wherever it might be that you want for that day to produce the adaptations that you might need, whatever that is. And you could get in and get out in 20 minutes. You know what I'm saying? You're getting quality work done in 20 minutes. And then the other days, if you need some more hypertrophy, then you can spend more time doing hypertrophy on that day, whatever it might be. But you don't have to spend all the time in the weight room. Like if it's the off season, like just get your minimum effective dose, something that elicits an adaptations, and then move on. Because you need to be ready for the game.
Just to touch on something that both of you mentioned is like, relatively low sets, low reps, minimum effective dose. Let's say I've got like trap bar deadlift or, just an example. I'm not saying everybody should trap bar in season or whatever. I'm gonna hit my warm-up sets, like I normally would. I do my first set of, something that's relatively intense. I do another set, maybe I call it. Like it depends. Like I think it's just important to kind of be specific in terms of numbers, because I think a lot of guys who like to get after it a little bit in the winter and even like late fall, who are ripping like 6, 8 sets of squats, bench, deadlift, who are a little bit more on that kind of like powerlifting side of things, which is fine. Like you're probably going to get something out of that. That doesn't mean that you can say like, okay, I'm only going to do 5 sets of like heavy bench in season. It means, either we're doing something else entirely, or we're doing, 2 or 3 sets of something. Or even just saying, okay, I'm just gonna like limit the tonnage, right? Like the total weight that I'm lifting. And that can be something that you can get done with, prescribed weights, whether, you have a coach or if you're like a, high school kid, middle of nowhere, kind of piecing together your own programming. If you have a generally good feel for what you're able to move on a certain, exercise numbers wise, it's totally fine to be like, okay, I'm gonna cap this, squat at, 225 or 245, or, I'm gonna put 185 on the bar for RDLs or something like that, and just move it with intent and be athletic and demonstrate some kind of power. That's fine. Like you're not gonna lose 2 or 3 miles an hour on your fastball just because you're not like maxing out on the big 3. That's kind of a strategy that tends to push you in the wrong direction of saying like, oh, I got so much stronger this winter, I can't wait to get so much stronger in the spring too. It's like, well, you have 60 games you got to go play, and would you rather, hit 275 on bench, or would you rather get a in-game PR? And you know what I mean? Like, what are we talking about? Like, we have to have some kind of priorities.
I think Mike Reinold maybe said this. It's a controlled fall, right? So good coaches will manage that fall better than bad coaches, and it's our job to do right by the players in those circumstances. You know.
And I think, going based on like when guys make huge progress in the offseason and they think they're gonna lose it immediately, it's not how it happens. Like if you touch it on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, you just get a small dosage, the minimal effective dose to produce adaptation, you're gonna maintain your strength. Yeah. Now, if you do completely nothing, well, that's when you actually start tapering down. But if you do a little bit of strength, and doesn't have to, if you could produce strength adaptations by doing isometrics to pins, right? You could do that's so you're not putting tonnage on your body. When it comes to load, hey, just push into this pins as hard as you can for 3 seconds, 5 seconds. Do a couple of those, then you elicit what you want, and then you can move on into something else you might need as well.
And you can wake up the next morning ready for the game.
Yeah. Exactly.
Instead of like, I have 9 hours to feel less sore before first pitch. It's like, dude,
yeah,
don't do that.
And that brings me to a point where it comes to like, all right, like we've talked about, maintaining strength and listed on that, and we've talked about, hey, we're always sore and fighting. How can we do a better job of using the weight room to elicit tissue restoration, to make the body recover a little bit faster by doing different modalities? What are things that you guys have done in your career with your athletes?
Yeah, first and foremost, it's going to be exercise selection, like knowing what you're going to ask your athlete to do and deciding if whatever the outcome is going to be is worth the risk of the soreness or whatever, right? So we could start with like, if you're going to do big 3 style lifts, a first good thing to do is think about range of motion a little bit more deeply, limit range of motion. You can use boxes if you're still going to box squat. If you're going to split squat, like with like a safety bar, like you can use pins and limit range of motion, things like that.
Deadlift blocks.
Yeah, deadlift blocks, same idea. Understand that like we can get good range of motion from elsewhere. Like maybe we're going to do some really light squat jumps rather than a full, safety bar squat ass to grass. And we're still going to be able to check both boxes, understanding where you're putting those stressors and how you're using your Legos to build an effective program is really what it comes down to.
And for all our high schoolers, deadlifting from blocks is not soft.
No.
It's not cheating. It's not any of that. Being on the shelf for your entire season because you refused to have some common sense in the gym is probably the softer side of things if you're going to make that argument. The one thing I'd add to sort of using constraints or just purposefully limiting range of motion on certain activities that maybe in the winter you were getting a little deeper on things in a way that would produce a little bit more soreness and whatever, is taking into account individual variables that may or may not apply to like your buddies or the guys in the other dugout or whoever. How tall are you, right? Like if you are, I'm sure you chuck, but if you're 5'4", you're probably not going to have to deadlift from pins or from blocks or, doing things that are really limiting range of motion on any sort of traditional exercise you might think of, because frankly, you're already there, right? And that's kind of a blessing and a curse, obviously. And on the flip side of that, if you are 6'4", 6'5", 6'8", whatever, you're obviously a different animal. And you can literally kind of just imagine how long it would take somebody who is 6'6" to do a set or even one rep of kind of anything compared to somebody who's like 5'8", 5'9", or even, like average height, 5'11", 6 feet, whatever it is for high school or college ball players, maybe a little bit taller. So like if I'm, if I have like a big Gumby looking dude, 6'7" or whatever, I'm not ripping, 4 or 5 reps of kind of anything heavy in season. You know what I mean? Whereas if you're 5'10", you could probably get away with like a set of 4 or 5 on a box squat or even something like a reverse lunge or a split squat potentially. Whereas if you put a big tall dude under a bar and say, give me 5 per side reverse lunge, first off, the set's going to be 4 minutes long. And it's just a whole lot more mechanical tension that you're dealing with, and you will get beat up. And then, the other thing I would say is like, it's not just height, obviously. There's a lot of different things. And individual guys are going to have different presentations in terms of range of motion. So let's say like I already am kind of a stiffer shoulder guy. Like whether or not, I'm not saying that the stuff is bad or the velocity is whatever, right? But if I am the type of person where either somebody that I've been working with that I trust on the strength and conditioning side has told me like, hey, probably be careful on certain things, whether it's like getting directly overhead on a press or something like a chin up or whatever, or even sort of like barbell stuff or certain machine activities where your grip is going to be fixed, so there's not really as much freedom for you to move around, the shoulder and the rib cage or whatever. That's not smart.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like there are things that you can do in the weight room, obviously to hang on to things like strength and power and size and even build those qualities. But there are ways to do it that are going to make sense for you, and there are ways to do it that aren't going to make sense for you, right? And if I'm already limited in range of motion at the elbow, at the shoulder, right? Like not a whole lot of range of motion rotationally at the elbow, and then I'm also doing a whole bunch of activities that are going to stiffen me up even more. Over time, it's like, I mean, obviously worst case is you get beat up, you start to kind of fall apart on the health side. But I think there are implications there, problems there that can pop up that people don't usually think about. And for me, the biggest one is losing shapes over the course of a season, right? Like if you're like a big slider guy who like really depends on getting around the side of the baseball and, whether it's firmer or softer or whatever, and over the course of the season, your capacity to get not to the side of the baseball becomes less and less because of something that you're doing, whether it's in the gym or just kind of like crappy lifestyle stuff like poor sleep or not taking care of yourself. All of a sudden your go-to pitch is gone, you're not punching guys out, and your season goes a whole nother way. And I think it's important to kind of talk about that type of thing, because I think a lot of times when that happens, in the athlete's mind, it's like, oh man, like I guess I just lost my feel for it. And they kind of don't really understand that it's probably something that happens. It's not really a mystery.
100%. I think what you're saying right there is like everybody, when it comes to individualizing things, which we do a really good job here at Tread, it's like, hey, finding things that the athlete struggles with post games. We understand that pitching is an overused thing, so tissues are going to get damaged. If you're ripping a slider, you're seeing supination over and over and over again, well, like you said, you're going to lose range of motion in that area. If you're more over the top, your lats are going to take more of a beating, right? That means that you're going to lose range of motion there. So if you're losing range of motion from throwing itself, and then you do stuff in the weight room that doesn't help that, it makes it worse, well, you're fighting yourself all the time. You're just going downhill. So when you have things that you're like, hey, like this usually gets beat up, my hamstring gets beat up, my real delt gets beat up, well, do things that help restore that, and that was with your doctor, manual therapy, soft tissue modalities, even strength modalities that could help you rebuild tissue, and then using things that give it the freedom to, one, bring it back, but two, that don't make it worse. There's things you could do in the weight room to like, hey, if I'm really, my pronator gets beat up all the time because I'm a supinator. If I go and crank on a barbell to do a deadlift like this, it's gonna make it even worse.
Yeah.
So now I have, like you said, going back-to-back high days in regards to not only pitching, but stress on particular parts of the body that get overly damaged is just detrimental, and you're just gonna continue fighting yourself, and then you're gonna be like, damn, I got hurt because I pitched too much. Well, you pitched too much and you did too much in the weight room. It's like, well, if you'd have done the right exercise in the weight room, probably could have been in a better spot.
I was gonna say, I'd be curious, obviously both of you guys have more experience than I do in terms of working in professional baseball. What are some things, because I don't want to get too like, you're gonna hurt yourself, like you're making all these mistakes. Yeah. Like it's good for people to know that there are good and bad decisions, obviously, in season. But what are some examples, if just off the top of your head, that you guys have had success with, maybe with certain types of guys in season, as far as, like it's good to know, like here are some things to stay away from. But at the end of the day, like I think it's useful to have something to kind of fill that gap. What are some things that you guys have had success with over the years in terms of, whether it's like more passive stuff or actually kind of getting after it, that you have found to be more restorative? Like I know we talked about general kind of putting together a day, but certain specific activities or anything like that,
Yeah, I think it's important to kind of highlight the nice parts of this rather than just the scare tactics side of it. one thing that we touched on already is like machine-based work, why it might not be a fit for people, but it's also a tremendous asset in season, especially in professional baseball, where you're going to be on the road often. You're going to be using commercial gyms when you're on road trips. One, it's really nice from a variety standpoint. Guys will love to get in there and just like crush a machine. And if you can be mindful about choosing which machines, which activities you're going to do as a coach, like you can provide a really fun stimulus at a very low cost as far as like training economy, because it's easy to sit on a machine and do, you know, single leg extensions. You know what I mean? It's just a different sensation, and it allows us to chase after very specific things without, you know, needing to put a bar on our back. The other thing, which we talked about a little bit at the beginning, and something that me and you have talked about a bit, is like, how can we make bodybuilding like kind of fun? And it's really just selecting the right variation of a curl that's going to, you know, allow you to chase some shoulder range of motion, using tricep kickbacks to get the scap to move well, things like that, where guys think they're, you know, bodybuilding and having fun. They're getting the pump they want, but we're also tricking them into moving better, you know? And I think those are the two really like wins that you can stack up during this season, at least on the professional side. What do you think, John?
Yeah, 100%. I think giving the athlete some time to have fun is very important, because the season could be very monotonous. It's just the same thing. Schedule is the same every day. You know, do this, do that, show up to the game, go to sleep, do it all over again. So I run kind of a trial run either the last month of the preseason and then going into spring training with my guys. We're like, hey, like, you're gonna be a bullpen guy. You're gonna be a guy that's gonna be in a 6-day rotation in Double-A. Let's run through this. I'll give you 3 different options of when to place what. Try them all, and then you tell me which one you like the best. So now the athlete has autonomy of like, hey, I like the second option because I was able to be more recovered for my game. Because I was always telling them, hey, like, we got to find the best routine that gets you to feel 100% for the game. So for example, let's say 6-day rotation guy, usually game days, I'll program something. If the game doesn't go too long, if it doesn't go over 70 pitches, hey, get something of a strength output in the weight room. Might be pins to squat to pins, something quick, probably 2 sets of 5 seconds. Hey, do something for the shoulder to recover from there. The following day will be ideally just a light conditioning, some movement flow, mobility flow. Then do a primer in regards to plyometrics or sprints for a bullpen. Then the bullpen, them some more powerful, like more plyometrics or more speed work. You could actually incorporate a little more tissue restoration there, and then the next following days are just prepping for the game. That's one option, and then the other option, we were like, hey, move in the bullpen to a day prior, and just giving different options to the athlete. So, hey, play around with it. The goal is to hit a little bit of strength, a little bit of power, a little bit of tissue restoration throughout the week, so you're not losing all the qualities throughout the year. You're maintaining all those qualities by placing them in the right position. And then the athlete itself will be like, dude, I really like how it feels to sprint the day before. Or guys will be like, dude, I feel gas after that. So I was like, all right, if you feel gas because you sprinted the day before, let's switch the sprinting and the mobility, and let's do the mobility flow the day before. So now you're giving the athlete some autonomy of what to do. They're still doing everything we want. They're still getting every necessary adaptation that we want to maintain throughout the year. But when there are those things placed, I'll just give them some freedom to like, hey, this is your outline. Try these. This is what you have to do on each day. When you place them, up to you.
Yeah, it's like dialogue and literally like freedom, basically. Like, it might sound kind of dramatic, but like, I think the dialogue piece is really important, especially for, I mean, you know, like, we get kids who sign up who don't necessarily know what is okay for them to tell us. Like, hey, I've been doing X drill that you gave me for a couple weeks and it kind of hurts my neck, or like, it doesn't feel good. And that's really valuable feedback. And I think a lot of times guys get trapped in this mindset of like, I'm gonna do the work, like, I'm not gonna, complain or whatever. It's not complaining. That's valuable data that we can then go and do something about. If it's something specific, like, hey, my neck kind of bothers me on a landmine press. It's like, okay, kind of relatively unusual, right? But maybe I kind of missed something in the intake process in terms of cervical range of motion or scaling tissue quality, whatever, and I can kind of make an adjustment based off of that, right? It works a whole lot better when it's a feedback loop instead of it being like a one-way street, basically, right? If I don't know how you feel, like it's remote training, right? Obviously, you might get in here, a week or two a year or whatever, or more for certain guys or less for certain guys. But if you're getting beat up, like I used to, even in person, like when I was working entirely in person before, guys will come up to you and say like, hey, my elbow's been bugging me, my knee's been bugging me, whatever. And you say, how long has this been going on? They say 7 weeks.
It's too much.
Tell me, dude, like to say something. That's not normal. Not everybody's elbow hurts. Like that's not normal, right? So yeah, I think the dialogue is a really big deal. And then, older guys, college, pro ball, even guys in the league, it's like, sometimes I think they don't feel like they're busy. They are very busy guys, right? Like they're doing, pregame work. They're talking about, scouting reports, whatever. They're on the bus, they're on the plane, they're doing all this stuff.
Media, all this stuff.
And yeah, exactly. And sometimes I've had guys literally say like, I was gonna text you the other night, I forgot to mention to you, I rolled my ankle pretty bad, last Tuesday or whatever. And that's not on them, that's human, whatever. But there's always something that we can do. Like it's kind of a shame because I think a lot of athletes are sort of used to like, here's the program, do it, I don't want to hear about it. Not talking about anybody specific in the industry, it's just a thing, especially in strength and conditioning, compared to sort of like pitching in general. And that's not how it works. Like tell me, you know what I mean? When I say like send me video of whatever in the notes, I'm not like testing you or something. Like I genuinely want to see how it looks, or how it feels or whatever. So yeah, I think the dialogue is kind of, for certain guys, it's like make or break between, something doesn't feel good, it feels worse, and then all of a sudden you're on the shelf. But yeah, the other piece of that, like you said, is choice.
Yeah.
Like, whatever you want to call it, freedom, options, whether it is, something like a quadrant system, in season, which is probably a rabbit hole for another day potentially, but just not being like, okay, and to be clear, because I know it's like we talk about this all the time, it's obvious to us, if you are in season and not on a hard rotation schedule, right? Like I'm every 5 days, I'm every 7 days, it does not make any sense to say, here's your Monday lift, here's your Wednesday lift, here's your Friday, Saturday lift. It doesn't make any sense, right? If I'm a pen guy and my lifting schedule, no matter how fine-tuned it is to be like an in-season program and to make me feel good and be restorative and maintain certain output-based qualities, if it doesn't match up with your game schedule and your in-game usage, you're cooked. Like it doesn't matter, you know what I mean? So yeah, in terms of hit this day when you feel X, Y, and Z, or in this specific context. Like pro ball, like not even just pro ball, bullpen guys in general, I give them, they all have like 1 or 2 options of a day that I want them to hit, only if they're not gonna be hot in the next 36 hours. I do not want you to hit this particular day unless you know for sure that you have this window of time. And then maybe you have a day or two that's like, you could pretty much hit this whenever, maybe just don't rip it, a half hour before game time if you're a pen guy or whatever. And then even within an actual day of programming, right? Because at the end of the day, if we want to cover all of our bases, it would almost come down to like, here's 6 or 7 or 8 different workouts. Yeah. If we want to be like really,
it's like a decision tree.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that is doesn't usually play out for all kinds of reasons.
Anyone. Yeah.
Something that I've had some success with is within a certain day, having options literally between particular exercises, right? So like, I don't know, both of you have seen my programming, but like, maybe A series is some kind of jump or primer or something. And then, B1 is like, if you feel good and if you don't really care about maybe being a little bit more beat up tomorrow, put a bar on your back. Like we're gonna rip some box squats, we're gonna rip some reverse lunges, whatever. if you are beat up, or if you do kind of need to be fresher in that 24-hour, 36-hour window, we're going to hit some step downs or some, dumbbell, whatever, right? Something a little bit less fatiguing. I feel like that's played pretty well for me and for my athletes, in terms of like, only do this if you feel good, and also only do this or that based on what your next couple of days, looks like. And then the last thing, I know I'm just going on and on at this point, but the last thing I want to mention on that side of things is optional sets, right? So like your first 2 sets of, trap bar clusters or whatever, I'm expecting you to do them. Your third set, I want you to do it if you feel great. Your fourth set, I want you to do it if you feel great and you are definitely not on the board tomorrow, right? And that's just an example. But the more, as long as you like trust somebody to make reasonable decisions, which hopefully, we do for most guys, the more sort of, like you said, it's like a dialogue tree. Like the more kind of options you give them within a day to make decisions that feel right for them in the moment, broadly speaking, you're going to have better outcomes, in my experience.
Yeah, I mean, you're also kind of rubbing up against something that John and I have talked about a lot, which is like microdosing.
Yeah.
Microdosing ultimately will work kind of in a similar capacity or to a similar capacity, especially in a professional setting. Really, I'm giving a guy 6, 7 small lifts, and depending on where he is that day, he's going to have some freedom over what he's going to do. So it might be like he's going to do 2 sets of 2 exercises, and then he's going to go pitch that day. And that's not going to be, it's going to be enough stimulus to kind of capture whatever training we're looking for, but not so much where it's going to impact performance, right? And if he pitched yesterday, you can do 2 of those blocks, and we'll have little extra days, which kind of works into the bonus sets that you're talking about. Like, hey, if you feel good, go ahead and do one of these little extra workouts. And it's just about accumulating enough over the course of an entire week. And then, from a coaching perspective, over an entire month, we can take that minimum effective dose concept and say, all right, well, you've done kind of this kind of conjugate dynamic effort style workout like 4 times last week. You haven't hit as many max effort days, so make sure after you pitch, we're gonna hit this, okay? This little mobility day, we're gonna do a low seated landmine press and a side plank and chase some shoulder stuff, and you're gonna feel great when you leave. Just being smart about like the actual layout.
Yeah, totally.
Going from there, I'm talking about minimal effective dose, microdosing. I think for relievers, microdosing is probably the best thing
I think so
we
too.
could do. I had an example yesterday with one of my relievers in AAA. I told him like, hey, I gave you the layout. He's gonna do Wednesdays. This is your lower. It's like 2 supersets, very minimal, just more plyometric base. And on a Saturday, Sunday, depending on how he feels, there's your next lower. Uppers are based when do you pitch, because he's high usage guy. Hey, whenever you pitch, ask your pitcher, are you hot tomorrow? If you're hot, just go do your arm care and go to the showers. If you're not hot, all right, perfect. Get that, sub-maximal upper. And ideally, those are incorporating more things that are going to rebuild tissues that he feels nagging afterwards. Like, hey, like you crush, like you lose a lot of internal rotation after pitching. Let's find and do exercise that rebuild that. So get you ready, get you that actual next day to recover. Should be ready for the following day. If there are instances where he has and he goes like, hey, it's Tuesday, I don't have a lift today, but I do Tuesday and I'm hot tomorrow. Okay, perfect. Don't do that lift on Wednesday. You're probably going to throw again. If you go back to back, well, if you feel good, get a total body in, mix these 2 extra lifts together, and then you have 2 days break after that. And then you just compile intensities in more days, but just giving them more options, especially for relievers, like, hey, like we got to make sure that we're doing things that are not affecting the game, right? We got to do things that get you ready for the game. And then whenever we could plug and play things to help you rebuild your body to be back at 100%, we do that. Times where I told him, hey, probably the only time you're going to go for a really heavy workout is if you go back to back on a Friday, Saturday, because you're not going to throw Sunday, and then you have Monday off. So then you have that 36-hour window to recover from the heavy output workouts. But usually, other than that, it's just like, hey, managing, finding ways to do small workouts here or there, 20 minutes, 15 minutes, 25 minutes, get in that efficiency you need, and go from there.
Yeah, well, you got to have some kind of feel.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like I've had more than a couple conversations over the years where it's like, bullpen guy, college ball, pro ball, not high school, you're not really playing back-to-back games that often in high school, where it's like, hey, like I pitched Friday, felt great. wasn't supposed to be a close game on Saturday, but it was. I pitched Saturday too, but I was kind of hanging because I hit that lift Friday night. What? Like, don't do that, man. Like, have some feel. And if you're not sure, ask. Like, I think that's kind of like one of the points that might feel obvious to a coach, but kind of touching back on what I was talking about earlier with guys either not wanting to ask because they don't want to come off as like dumb or something, which I think is I respect it and I, whatever, but like, I'm your coach, man. Like, I'm never going to be like, you should know this. You should know this.
We're
like,
here to help.
Yeah, exactly. Especially like somebody who's relatively new to the process, whether that's relatively new to more serious player development stuff, or even just sort of on the newer side to working with us specifically. If you don't ask, we can't help. And there's really no shame in that. Like, even, pro guys, I mean, you know this, but you both know this. Like, if you don't ask, I can't help. And if I can't help, unfortunately, 20 to 26-year-old dudes tend to make some weird decisions sometimes in terms of like when they're going to lift, how hard they're going to get after it, sleep stuff, nutrition stuff. Rely on us as resources. And if you don't have somebody who you feel like you can rely on as a resource, right? Or even maybe you're in pro ball or in college ball, or I mean, even in high school too, and you don't really feel like it's a good idea to tell your coach that you're feeling beat up or whatever's going on, which is unfortunate, but that is a thing that happens all the time. You gotta lean on us, man. You know what I mean? And this is the most salesy thing I'll say the whole time, is like, if you don't have somebody in your corner like that, it's probably a decent idea to look into something like that, whether it's trad or otherwise.
If you've signed up for remote coaching, I don't know why you wouldn't take advantage of that. Like this, again, I feel you. We are getting a little salesy, which is not the intention of this talk. But, I have a number of guys, and when I have my initial intake with an athlete, what I say to them is, don't be the guy that I don't hear from for 4 weeks, and then when something goes wrong, you send me 20 videos and schedule 2 phone calls. Like, that's not going to work, okay? There are guys that have a lot of success on this program because they're willing to talk once a week. We're not asking for a ton. There are going to be certain weeks where we talk for 5 minutes. You have one question about substituting an exercise or a plan for a bullpen. It literally takes 5 minutes to have this call.
It's worth it. Yeah,
right?
literally. Yeah,
and there are other weeks where we'll talk mechanics and just get down rabbit holes for half an hour. And that's the beauty of it, right? It's more about establishing that cadence of communication. And it doesn't matter if you're like communicating a little here or a lot there. It's just about being consistent with it,
Yeah, it's like having continuous assessments, right? Like every day is an assessment.
Everything is assessment, right? Yeah.
And then if you're able to, have more assessments, that way it will lead you to make better decisions. Because if you, as an athlete, tell us, hey, I'm feeling this, well, all right, let's try this, something else, right? Let's go this route, because if this hasn't worked, right, your body is unique, everybody's body is unique, and they respond to stimulus in a different way. So the more information we get from the athlete as that daily assessment, that daily or weekly intake, right, the best we could help guide. But, segueing into a conversation about relievers, we talked about 6-day rotation, 7-day rotation guys, so high usage guy relievers that are going to be thrown frequently. But what about those guys that don't get thrown on? They spend 2 weeks, haven't thrown in a game, right? Because they're not that good. They're like back in the rotation. What should we do, or what have we done from a development standpoint to help those guys out? 1, continue making gains in season, but 2, not being fried for when that opportunity comes, because it's a tricky situation to be in.
I mean, it's tough. I think the first thing you have to kind of delineate is like, not talking about red shirts, really, right? Or even guys who are sort of stuck at the facility, in pro ball for the entire season. Usually, or hopefully, I guess is a better word, those guys are going to have something structured from an organizational standpoint. Whether it's like, here is a longer term plan to literally get you ready for the fall, like 6, 7, 8 months from now, and then there's all sorts of things that might be going on the pro ball side of things. So if you are not, in that context where you like definitely are not going to be facing hitters in the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, month, I think there is one hurdle that we kind of have to be able to get over as coaches and that athletes kind of have to get over as well, which is, where's your coach at with this, like at school, right? Do they literally want you to be ready for whatever, whenever? That is a thing, like pretty frequently. And I think that's a case where, unfortunately, you kind of have to treat them like they are in season a little bit, right? Maybe with a little bit of picking up some ground in terms of short-term fatigue, right? So if I have a guy who, it's May and they have 2 innings pitched on the season with 4 appearances or whatever, right? It's a pretty safe bet that they aren't going to be asked to throw on something like a Friday. Like, it gets a little bit more specific, right? Those opportunities that you might get are more likely to come in a midweek or maybe on a blowout on a Sunday or something like that. So you can kind of tie that in a little bit, not kind of, you can tie that in a little bit to those day-to-day, week-to-week decisions as far as, okay, my post-pen lift, like my midweek heavier lift for somebody who is definitely going to throw on the weekends. Sure, we might get after it a little bit, but it's still like, about readiness. Like, be ready for Friday, be ready for Saturday, whatever it might be. Whereas if you're that guy who, like, it might be a Sunday or it might be July in summer ball the next time you face hitters, I'm going to be a little bit more willing as a strength and conditioning coach to kick your ass a little bit on a midweek post-pen type of lift, if you're even throwing a pen at all, because that structure may or may not be there. You know what I mean? At least on the college side.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You're going to do a little bit more. We're willing to take that risk in service of you getting better, right? And it's going to be the same on a movement prep end. Like, maybe we're going to be more aggressive with some of your movement patterns and fix a little bit more. And I'm okay if you're a little bit sore, right? I know that it's not super likely that in this particular situation, like Ethan said, a Friday night that you're going to be called upon. So I'm okay if you're a little bit sore going into that situation. The other thing is, if there's a guy with like huge body comp needs, right, either to gain lean body mass or he's a little chunky and he needs to like slim down a little bit, we're going to really hammer that point to a greater extent than a guy whose focus is like on competing, right? So really making sure the food journal is dialed in, making sure that we're in communication with different eating strategies, like when we're on the road, that sort of thing, understanding that we're still gonna be able to make progress in these other realms, even if you're not pitching as much as you'd like to be.
Yeah. I think it's something that people don't really think about as much, except for the guys who aren't playing, who are very aware of this, which is that when you're not playing, you have all of this mental space that is not being taken up by being in the game, or even like, traveling on the weekends, or being in the dugout, or, whatever it might be. And I think a lot of times, unfortunately, those guys end up kind of left alone with those thoughts on the weekends, or, not traveling to a midweek or whatever it might be, where ironically, that's actually a huge opportunity to do that, right? To kind of like set aside a little bit of time and some mental energy to be like, okay, what the hell is going on with my nutrition stuff right now? Or what are some things that I can do, that I can like purposefully do to improve my sleep schedule and my sleep quality and things like that? Whereas if you were to try to have that conversation with somebody who is, getting 2 or 3 appearances a week out of the pen, or somebody who's like set into a starting rotation, they're gonna say like, what are you talking about, dude? It's May. Like, I can't think about that right now. You know what I mean? So yeah, it's 1,000,000% a big opportunity to touch on things for certain guys that you almost certainly would not want to touch on with guys who are playing a lot. And then I think the other side of that is kind of what I mentioned in the very beginning, which is guys who are definitely not playing, right? Whether that is you're like actually a red shirt, like medical red shirt, injured, maybe you're not technically a red shirt, but your coach gave you some bad news about like your usage that season. It really depends on like, are they expecting you to throw live ABs twice a week? Like, are they gonna kind of sort of use you as like a practice guy? Or is it a genuine situation where you have 6, 7, 8 months to prep, maybe not 8, you have several months to prep for the fall, and the coach understands that? which I mean, I can't speak for you guys, but for me personally, I love that stuff, dude. Like I think very rarely, especially in baseball, does it make sense to say, here are your next like 3, 4, 5 months of programming ahead of time, because things are always changing. Like range of motion changes, body comp changes, strength, power, size, whatever. Ideally, you should be, as a strength and conditioning professional, sort of kind of like going on the fly and reacting to that data in real time and making good decisions. Whereas if you know this dude doesn't really have any in-game expectations, responsibility between now and the summer, right, between January and summer, or even if they're not going to play summer ball either, you can really sit back and sit down with the kid, and maybe it is like a longer phone call, you know what I mean, hour, whatever, not every week or anything like that, please. Where it's like, okay, this is what we're going to do first, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this. And of course, that game plan might change, but it is a good opportunity to kind of structure that out a little bit and to kind of get work done more efficiently. When you don't have to worry about playing, you can get things done in the weight room a lot faster than you can otherwise. And I know for a fact that, I mean, we're pitching coaches as well, obviously, but I know for a fact any skill coach would tell you the same thing. If you tell them, hey, guaranteed no game action for the next month, do whatever you want with this guy. As a coach, it's like being a kid in a candy store, because we can say, okay, we're going to work on the slider, we're going to work on the changeup, we're going to work on the first move, whatever. And then obviously in the gym, it's range of motion, it's, you know, lean muscle mass, it's power, output, you know, whatever it might be. So it sucks in the moment. Obviously, when you get told like, hey, you're not really going to be a part of the team this year, but you have to be able to turn around and not just like sulk for 4 months and say like, okay, what am I going to do to get better? And you know, who's in my corner on the coaching side to help me do that specific thing.
Yeah, it always comes back to understanding like, what is your role, and knowing what your role is, and asking the question like, hey, what is my role? Like, if I'm not going to be pitching, am I going to be used a lot? Am I going to be in a 6th day? Am I going to be in 7? Like, that's going to help us make better decisions in regards to your long-term journey. Because like, yes, it's cool when you strike out 5 and you go 5 scoreless, but we have to think about long-term, right? We have to continue thinking about the development over the years, not just a 2-mile-per-hour PR, but want to see how does that increase over the months, over the years, and making better decisions is gonna, from the beginning, it's gonna help us get to that point. But we need to know what is the role, so to know how much time do we have, and when to allocate things.
And just to be clear, along the lines of allocating things, there is no substitute for real game reps. I think we're all in agreement there. Like, you can come here and spend all the time you want in training and doing everything else, but like, you gotta go face hitters if you wanna get better. I've seen it a million times. Having said that, if you're a subpar young pitcher looking to accumulate like a huge amount of innings, showing the same subpar repertoire in a showcase setting over and over again, maybe have a conversation with yourself and like your support group about how your development should go, how you should allocate that time, right? Because you know what guys in pro ball will always say is like, you never get that time back, that like 7 months of unbroken training, you never get it again, right? So if you do have time when you're young to check that box and get stronger, faster, move better, you know, develop some great off-speed pitch, there's really no substitute for that. So understand, while game is always going to be our priority, if you can devote time, disappear for a while, and show up as something more when you're ready, like, that's huge.
Especially if you're that young guy that, like, yeah, you could, like you said, you could pitch, you've played all these games, if you're like stuck at 81, 82, well, you need to develop a little more and redefine a couple things. And that's why we see guys when they go and have TJ and they have 12, 16 months rehab, they come back.
Perfect example.
Exactly, they come back stronger, throwing harder, everything's because you have
stopped.
You have all this window to develop and redefine things that you're not good at. Now you come back and now you get the game reps. Now you're so much better. So just if you're that young guy, you have the opportunity. Like, hey, let me step back a little bit from the showcases. And, you know, if I'm throwing 81, 82 at a showcase, I could throw a million showcases. Nobody's going to care. So take your time, take your 7, 8 months. So like, all right, like, I have to commit to develop and do the best things for my long-term career.
Yeah,
but absolutely, 100%.
I think it's funny because, I mean, at least when I was a kid or in high school or, you know, whatever, the whole thing was like, I heard that Tommy John surgery makes you throw hard.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like,
Same thing.
what,
you
you
know?
know? But in reality, it's like, that's just the first time that that guy has had 7, 8, 9 months of uninterrupted time to work on stuff. You know what I mean? And you're right, it doesn't really happen. Like we have, you know, in the fall, it's like, you know, big leaguers roll in, pro guys roll in after throwing 120, 140, 160 innings, which nowadays is like 200 innings, right? And high schoolers are like, yeah, but like when is he gonna hit his like strength phase in the gym or whatever? It's like, dude, that's not really how that works. Like he, you know, it's pretty much just about feeling good and staying on the field for the most part. And I really do think it's high schoolers especially are always thinking about, I can't wait to get to college ball. I can't wait to get to pro ball. I can't wait to do X, Y, and Z. It's like, dude, it's right now. Like this is it, you know? And if you don't do the thing now with the time that you have, and you can actually kind of stay present and do things that are actionable, whether it's the weight room, nutrition, you know, mental health, just taking care of yourself in general, that next thing that you're excited to happen is, you know, might just not happen, right? Like college ball, you might get hurt, it might not work out. Pro ball, you might be throwing, you know, 88 and it might not work out. So it is what it is, but I think it's, unfortunately, it's a kind of a wake-up call that a lot of kids need to hear.
Yeah, do it
You know
early.
what I mean? Yeah,
Do it
yeah,
early.
yeah.
It gets really hard when you're 22 and you're coming off your first pro season, and it was very underwhelming, and you have to like figure something out.
Reassess.
Yeah, do it when you're a teenager.
Absolutely. Well, I think we touched upon a lot of good conversations, a lot of good topics there. So hope everybody liked kind of the conversation today. A lot of good things being said. But yeah, that's all we got. Thank you guys. Appreciate it. Thanks, bud. Good conversation. Oh, well, hold on. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Like should be right there. Subscribe around here. And please comment. Comment something. You know what I'm saying? Nothing hateful.
Ask
All
me a
right.
question.
Yeah.